Right on, writers, and welcome to the Books by Adrian author platform. I'm sorry for the lack of video. Just minutes before we were meant to go live, for some reason, my camera just decided it no longer wants to communicate with my computer. I tried different cables, I tried everything that I could, and it's just not happening. So I'm going to be a disembodied voice for today's episode. I hope that's not a big disappointment for anybody. Knowing what I look like, I'm sure it's not. Now, if this is your first time here, the voice you're hearing is that of Adrian Santiago. Let me get my stuff up here. Boom, that's my name. I write books. My prologue to my novel is this reader magnet here, The Death and Rebirth of Bella Erdman. You can see the picture, boom, right there. You can get that for free by signing up to my newsletter. The link is in the description down below. It's a free ebook. Join the newsletter. It's a nice 10,000 word short story. I don't know if that still qualifies as a short story, but it's in there, and it'll lead into the novel. If you like this, you are going to want to continue reading my debut novel, Mythic: Shadow the Spark. It's a crime thriller set in this sci-fi fantasy world, and I am currently working on book 2, The Face of Gaia, and that will be hopefully out next year. I'm working on it now. We'll see. And the series will be 5 books plus little in-betweeners like Bella Erdman here. Go get your stuff. The links are in the description down below. It's cheap. It's like $2.99 for the ebook, and it's 150,000 words. So I think you're getting bang for your buck, in my opinion. But, you know, I'm biased. Label all questions for my guest today with a Q. This is The Writer's Den. All right. Now, I also forgot to show you guys what the book looks like. If this is your first time, that's what it looks like. It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's a nice cover. Anyway, today's show, whoopsie daisy, we have a very awesome guest. His name is James Flanagan. He's a PhD in cancer genetics. I can't wait to talk to him about that a little bit. He works at a university, so I can only assume that he's also a professor there. And he writes books. Sci-fi books and speculative fiction. What's the difference? I don't know. We're going to find out. Here we go. Oh my God, that's not you. You are not Philip Carter. That's not you at all.
But I am me.
I uploaded the wrong thing. See, I am way off my game today. What's going on? James Flanagan, hello, welcome. How are you today?
I'm well. Very well, thank you.
It's very nice to have you. I apologize for all the mishaps. It's like rookie hour here. You would think that I have not been doing this for the past 3 years. James, hi. Welcome to the Writer's Den. Please let the folks at home know who you are, where you are from, and when you started writing.
Oh, good questions. So I'm James Flanagan. You mentioned I work at a university. I work at Imperial College. Not quite professor. My title there is reader, so that's kind of like assistant or associate professor or something like that in the US. I work in London, but I am originally from Australia. You may or may not tell from the accent. I grew up in Brisbane and then got my PhD there in, as you said, in a cancer genetics field. And then worked as a postdoc in Canada. I worked there for a little while and then moved to London. And then, you know, as my career developed, I started my own lab at Imperial College and have been there ever since. So I've been writing science, facts and papers. I've written, I think I've co-authored maybe over 95 papers now. I kind of lose track after a while. But as far as fiction goes, I've been writing, I guess, in earnest since around about 2009. I kind of have a point in time where I know that started happening because I busted my ACL and had to get knee reconstruction surgery and spent a lot of time sitting down doing nothing. And while I was sitting down doing nothing, I started writing. And, you know, I've written short stories. I've done a lot of writing competitions, which I find a lot of fun, doing a lot of short short flash fiction and things like that. And at some point, I kind of felt like I really ought to write a novel because I had an idea. I wanted to get that idea out there. And so I thought the best way to get that idea out there is to write it.
Nice.
And so that's what I started doing.
All right. Well, let's back up a little bit and let's talk about your move from Brisbane, Australia, to London. What's the biggest like culture shock in that move?
Well, don't forget that there was Canada in the middle of that.
Nice.
I think the biggest shock to my system at that point was moving from Brisbane, where it was summer in January at 35 degrees, that's Celsius, to Toronto, where at the time in January it was minus 20. So moving from a negative 50 degree shift was quite a shock to the system.
I'm from Buffalo, New York myself. I'm just minutes away from Niagara Falls over there. Right now I'm in Orlando, but originally I'm up in Buffalo.
Yeah, no, I remember that area.
Cold,
I remember going on a ski trip there, I think.
Oh.
There's some nice Happy Valley or something like that.
Oh yeah, there's wonderful ski country up there. Some good spots for sure. But it's all those winters are harsh up there, man.
Yeah, so I moved to Toronto, yes, of course, for work, but also I wanted to learn how to go snowboarding. Something you can't do in Brisbane. So I wanted to go somewhere and learn how to do that. So I did that. I spent 2.5 years in Toronto.
It's a noble pursuit.
Yeah. Can also lead to injuries.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Nothing too bad, nothing too serious.
That's good.
But I did meet my wife in Toronto.
There you go.
Where we obviously got together and then together decided we wanted to move to London. So that's where we moved next, and that's where we've stayed.
Nice. And so, what's your favorite thing about living in London now?
Oh, so I'm a really big fan of the theatre. I really love going to the theatre, and there's
nice.
The West End here has some of the best things you can see in the world. I've seen some fantastic plays. I remember, I'll just give you some examples. Seeing Waiting for Godot with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen in the lead roles. That was fantastic. I've seen Patrick Stewart doing Macbeth. I've seen him doing The Tempest. I'm sure I've seen him doing something else. I've seen what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Played the Hobbit.
Martin Freeman.
That's him. I saw him doing Richard III, which was also fantastic.
Wow.
I've seen Benedict Cumberbatch do Hamlet. So, you get a sense that there's so many fantastic. Oh, Alfred Molina did Red.
I heard that was good. I've heard a lot of people talking about that one, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was just magic, that one. That's one of the great advantages of London.
Nice.
Many, many other things in London. That there's something for everybody in London.
Sounds good. I like it. So let's talk about your PhD in cancer genetics then. How exactly does one end up in that particular niche of cancer genetics? It seems to me like there's probably a pretty epic journey that leads to specializing PhD in cancer genetics.
Yeah, basically, going back to my undergraduate degree, I was in an undergraduate degree. It was kind of like a pre-med course where they were training you to work in hospital labs, doing microbiology, doing hematology, doing pathology, those sorts of jobs. So that was my undergraduate course. And I went and did my work experience in a hospital lab, in a pathology lab. And it bored me to tears in about a week. It really did. It was awful. And just watching those people looking down a microscope doing cytology and things like that, and seeing these people that have been doing it for decades, and I just looked at them and I thought, I can't do that. And so I kind of leaned into research, and I did an honours degree, which is kind of like a master's degree, where you learn to start doing research, and that then obviously I did well in that, and that led to the PhD. And the PhD was focused on a particular cancer that's virally induced. So there's a virus called Epstein-Barr virus, which if you haven't heard of it, you've probably got it. It's very common. About 90% of the population has it. It causes things like glandular fever and various other things. known as the kissing disease. And this virus is also linked to some cancers. Some of the proteins in this virus can be oncogenic. They can cause cancer. And so we were studying how that virus causes cancer, altering the genetics of the host, of the cells and things like that. And that kind of, so that was the PhD, and that kind of led me to a new area of research called epigenetics, which is an area that not many people will have heard of. This is part of the DNA. There's chemical structures on top of the DNA that dictate how the DNA gets interpreted, how much of a gene gets made, how much of a gene turns into proteins. And there's a lot of things that we've learned over the last, 15, 20 years about how epigenetics is changed, is modified. Lifestyle factors, smoking, for instance. We've published on how smoking influences your epigenetic patterns and therefore might influence your cancer risk, for instance.
Sure.
And so that's where my career and my science has gone, in the last 15 or so years.
That's fascinating, man. That's wow. And just from hearing you speak so briefly on it, there's so much that goes into it. So many like different layers of like factors that can affect it one way or the other. That's wild. The kissing disease, though, I thought that was mono. Isn't that mono?
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. All right, I'm gonna have to look into this further. All right. So you mentioned it. You're over at Imperial College London. How long have you been there?
Since 2009.
Nice. Okay, you've been there a good while. It's not tenure yet, though, is it? When do you get tenure?
Yeah, kind of is. It
Yeah.
kind of is.
All right.
Yeah,
Nice.
they have a slightly different system in the UK, where once you get to senior lecturer or lecturer, that's kind of like a tenured post.
Now, being that you are now an author writing fiction, I find it very interesting that you have already published over 90 scientific documents. What can you tell me about these? What kind of stuff were you writing before you were writing fiction? What are these scientific papers you're publishing?
So when you're doing science, when you're doing research, obviously the way in which you get that research out to the world is you publish in scientific journals. You write your research up, introduction to the research, methods, results you discuss. You've got a discussion, and all the literature and all the citations and things like that. You create figures to present the results, and then you submit that paper. It's a little bit like submitting to magazines with fiction. You submit your paper to a journal. They take forever to read it and to get back to you. The reviewers review it and they reject it. And then you send it to another journal, and then you go through this cycle. And it can sometimes take quite a long time, 6 to 12 months to get papers published. As the lead author, I think I've published about between 20 and 30 papers. I can't remember the exact number now. Many of the papers are co-authors, so I'm, somewhere in the middle. A lot of research these days is very collaborative. So I'm part of a consortium around the world that is studying ovarian cancer genetics and ovarian cancer risk. And that consortium has published quite a lot of papers as well. I think I'm on about 30 of those. Some of those are, papers with 400 authors on there, and I'm in there somewhere as a contributing author. So a lot of science gets done like that as well.
Yeah.
Some of the papers, obviously, I'm first author from when I was a bit more junior. But the more recent papers, I'm the senior author. When my PhD students themselves have published papers and things like that.
That's so interesting. The whole like academic side of publishing, and it brings to mind the academic libraries that I've been to and all the stuff that's in there that I'm like, what even is this? That's what it is. Like, you guys writing all these papers and publishing them on your research. It's really cool. How did you transition from that into your short stories, which I see you've published in different collections now?
Yeah, I think I've been writing short stories for probably longer than that. I seem to recall maybe 20 years ago starting to write just very small short stories. But it was around as a 2009 must have been an important year for me, I guess, because I started at Imperial there. I did the knee reconstruction I started for the very first time doing writing competitions. And there was one I started then called New York City Midnight Madness or something like that, and NYCM. And I've sort of reconnected with that in the last 3 or 4 years. And I've written quite a few stories for that particular competition, sometimes doing well, sometimes not so well. And there's also a lot of free things. A few years back, I started writing. There's an Australian free competition called Furious Fiction, which I started writing for just because it's a lot of fun. It's 500-word stories. It was monthly. Something just to get you writing and submitting something, and someone reads it. Occasionally you might make the long list or the short list, and occasionally you write a story that you think, actually, this is pretty good. And I've submitted some of those to get published at various venues, markets. So some of those have been published now. I've got a few short stories that are just about to come out. I've got a sci-fi short story coming out in Sci-Fi Shorts. That's coming out on the 19th of March. I just found that out today. I've got another story coming out on another Literally Stories, I think it is, on the 20th of March, which is called Dive Right In. That's a slightly longer short story. It's about 2,000 words.
Nice.
Yeah, so some of those came from these writing competitions. So, you do the competition, you don't win, you end up with a story which you can then shop around and send out to different markets. So,
Nice.
yeah, I've done quite a lot of that in the last 3 or 4 years.
That's pretty smart. I should try doing more like that. I have trouble writing short stories. Like I said at the beginning, my short story is 10,000 words. Like that's about as short as I can make them. Every time I try to write a short story or a flash fiction, it always ends up as an epic sci-fi trilogy or something.
Yeah. I kind of like when you get down to real microfiction, so, 50 words, 100 words, 300 words, these sorts of lengths, I look at it as a real puzzle. You're trying to fit all those jigsaw pieces together. And, no matter the word count, I still try to write a story with like a 3-act structure. You've got the introduction, the act 1, you've got the rising stakes in act 2, and you've got the denouement or the conclusions in act 3.
Yeah.
So even in 100 words, you can do that. But it's, as I said, it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to get those words to fit.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, because you have to do like an entire arc in a couple of sentences, pretty much. It's fascinating stuff. We have a friend of the show here. Her name is Bethany Vota, and in our little author tube community, she's kind of considered the queen of flash fiction because, man, she can just hit you with a couple of words and destroy you. Just make you you're like, why do I care so much about a character I've been listening to or been reading about for 5 minutes? How is this possible? It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's just talent.
What lesson have you learned from publishing all these short stories?
I think one of the things that I've learned from publishing, whatever stories you're writing, one of the first things is if you want to get published, you've got to put it out there. You've got to submit to lots of different places. Rejections will be your friend. I'm starting to count my rejections this year. I thought I'd set myself a target of collecting 100 rejections from short story submissions this year. I'm up to 17. I've got a little board just up here. I'm up to 17. But with that 17 rejections, I've had 3 stories accepted. So, the more you get it out there, the more you get accepted. I think that's the first lesson.
You are the second person to give that particular advice to me, and I think I'm finally ready to listen. That the idea of aim for as many like 100 rejections, like you said. Like don't worry about the rejections coming. They're gonna come. They're guaranteed. They're gonna come. So just shoot for them anyway, and eventually something's gonna fall through. Yeah.
Celebrate the rejections. That's what I always say.
I put my novel into a sci-fi indie author competition late last year, and the first round of cuts takes a very, very long time. There's a lot of books and there's a lot of groups reading the books. So the longer I went without getting cut, the more excited I was getting. Like, oh my God, I have a real shot. But it was still like the first round of cuts. Like they kept announcing books that were getting cut and my book wasn't in there. And I just kept getting more and more excited. And then it's the last, list of cuts. And the books that are left after this list are the finalists that we're going to actually go into the contest with. And that's where I get cut, like right there, right before I'm like, man.
Yeah. So my book, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute.
Yes. The next question.
I was entered in a competition called SPSF-C, self-published sci-fi.
That's the one. That's the one I was in.
So that's the one I was in as well. And I made it all the way to the unofficial quarterfinalist stage. So it didn't get cut like the earlier books. It got to what was described as quarterfinalist, although apparently that's not an official title, although there's a badge for that, which I'm claiming. And yeah, there's
I would have too. If I hadn't gotten cut, I would have been one of those and I would have claimed it too.
And if you get to semi-finalist and then get cut, claim it.
Yeah.
Semi-finalist in a competition.
I'm putting a sticker on the book. Last cut in the competition.
Whoever wins these competitions, no doubt their books are going to be great. I've seen a couple of them. I've got some of them on Kindle Unlimited, so I can read them. And some of them are really good.
Yeah, I read a couple of the ones in the contest myself, and I understand why mine got cut. So, talk to me, man. Science fiction versus speculative fiction. People know what this means. I do not. I thought they were one and the same thing.
Well, I think it's fair to say that science fiction is speculative fiction, but not all speculative fiction would be science fiction.
I see.
I think that's, to me, what the difference would be. Speculative fiction can probably lean towards fantasy a little bit as well.
Interesting.
For instance, a ghost story. Is ghost story science fiction? Probably not.
Paranormal?
Is it speculative fiction? I'd say it probably is. You may or may not believe in ghosts.
Oh, I see. I see what you mean. You're speculating on the possibility of the ghost.
It's just speculative fiction. And
interesting.
You could also call it fantasy, perhaps.
So it's about the possibility of the thing in the book. Interesting.
Yeah, the possibility of whatever it is that's unknown that you're writing about.
I like that. All right. See? This is why we get college professors in here teaching us some lessons. Now I'm learning. Pitch us. Is it Genefire or Genefear?
Oh, interesting. It's Genefire.
I was wrong. Genefire. All right. What do we got on Genefire?
So, you got a picture of it there. I've got the book in my hand.
Normally I'd hold mine up too, but no camera.
That's it. So Genefire is a story. It's science fiction. I describe it as hard science fiction because it's very much about the genetics and DNA. Basically, this story starts with two pairs of people, really, in what we call near future, which I don't necessarily describe the year it happens, but it's around about 2050. So, 30 years from now or thereabouts. We have a PhD student who, like many PhD students, is a little bit unsure of himself. He comes in a bit cocky to start with, but then through the 3 years of hard labor in his PhD and no results and, completely unsure of himself, he then discovers something amazing. He discovers a message written in the DNA of a girl that he's sequenced the DNA of. The message is supposedly from the future, warning about the Earth's destruction. Now, he finds this and thinks, wow, this is fantastic. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. This is the most amazing thing anyone's ever seen. He shows his supervisor, and his supervisor pours cold water on it and says, you better not be joking about this. This is, potential scientific misconduct if you're just making up this bullshit. So he goes above his supervisor's heads to the funders and tells them about it. And they say, you better drop this or we'll invite you to a misconduct hearing and kick you out of your PhD. So he sets about trying to prove that the message is real. The samples from the lab disappear. The data on his computer disappears. So he has to go and find the girl from which the DNA samples came from. He enlists the help of a biohacker who's much more of an expert at genetics than he is. And she helps him sort of track this down and try to survive through his misconduct hearing. In the end, he gets kicked out of his PhD, but at the same time, he tries to save the world based on this message.
Right on.
So that's
crazy.
one half of that. So that's one point of view in this story. The other point of view is in the future, another about 100 years after that story, we have two characters, Tammy and Jessica. Tammy is like a maintenance guy on the International Space Station. And he is standing next to Jessica as they watch the world get destroyed from space. And Jessica's got this really bad feeling that it was all her fault. And so various things happen. She explains to Tammy why she thinks that. Eventually, what's destroying the Earth arrives on the International Space Station and kills everybody else, apart from Tammy and Jessica. They survive, and they set about just trying to survive on the International Space Station on their own, while there's nothing going on the Earth anymore. And then they discover this thing called GeneFire, which was a mothballed science project, which was a satellite up in space that could shoot something small into a wormhole, which would send it back in time. And they had been using this to send viral packages back through time to send messages. Think about where all the viruses come from. Viruses mutate all the time. But perhaps, as in this book, the viruses are being sent from the future with messages encoded on them. And that's one of the messages that Larry has discovered. So these two characters in the future have to wrestle with the idea, do we try and mess with time? Do we try and fix this? Do we send that message or not? And so that's what their story is all about.
Well, okay, tying the two sides together, the past and the future, and legitimizing the message that our main character in the first half has. This is cool, man. This is really cool. Now, I am sensing a little bit of write what you know with our PhD lead and all that. What's the inspiration behind this?
Yes. So obviously being through a PhD myself, and I've supervised, I think now 13 PhD students to finish. And I've seen it all. I've seen every range of emotions that PhD students go through. I've experienced many of it myself, the imposter syndrome that almost every PhD student gets at some point. I've seen all of that. And so a lot of that character is written from my own experience, either my own PhD or the students I've supervised. So yeah, there's a lot of that, right, what you know. I know that character really well. There's, the genetics expert who knows a lot of the genetics tricks, which obviously I know. I can talk about it because I know these tricks. Obviously, when it gets up into space, I'm not such an expert of space travel and, the physics behind the time travel and things like that. I had a long discussion with a friend of mine when we did an interview for this book a while back in October, where we were talking about the physics of that. And he tried to explain from his point of view how he thinks that physics might work. And I'll just do the hand wavy thing and just say it works.
Right. That actually kind of leads into what I was going to ask you next, because it sounds like you're using your, scientific background and knowledge to write better sci-fi books. So that was going to be the next question. How has it helped you write your sci-fi book? But the other side of that then is also, how has it challenged your writing of sci-fi books? Because so many sci-fi authors do the hand wavy, it's just space magic stuff. So talk a little bit about the yin and yang, the positives of your scientific background versus the challenges that it brings.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges I've found, obviously, the very first draft of this book had a lot more science in it and a lot more detailed explanations, and
I think I know where
went
this is
into
going.
much greater detail. And readers and editors said, "Cut that stuff out."
Yep.
And so I toned it right back down. There is a chapter at the beginning of the book where Larry Milton is doing his interview for his PhD position, where he's trying to impress the boss. And one of the questions they ask him in this interview is, how do you explain genetics to the lay person? How would you explain to the public about genetics? And so he goes into this little explanation of how he would describe genetics to the lay public. Now, I wrote that largely to give the reader a little bit of that knowledge about genetics that I wanted them to have, to understand the book. So, it's kind of a little primer in there for most people who don't understand genetics to get a little bit of new knowledge, I guess.
Yeah.
So, a lot of some of the science in this book is real things. So, for instance, Milton does this trick where he uses the genetics to track somebody down, to find out where they live and who they are and how big, how tall they are, how old they are. All of that sort of stuff.
And that's legitimate. Like, you can do it.
Sure is. If you read the author's note, I've cited some papers. As a scientist, of course, I've got to give you the citations. So that kind of work is being used in forensic science now. So we could swab some blood, at a crime scene, have a look at the DNA, and learn a whole bunch of things about that person. Whether it's looking at the epigenetics or the genetics, you can use the genetic variation to work out where they live, or not so much where they live, but where they're from. Is this person Welsh, or are they Chinese, or are they, South American, or the genetics tells you what their heritage is. So you can learn from that, and there's many other bits and pieces that you can learn from DNA that can tell you something about someone. You can look at predisposition for height, or eye color, hair color, all of that sort of stuff.
And is there any truth behind the whole idea of like the helix formation of DNA strands, and you hear a lot of conspiracy theorists always talking about like the importance of that shape, that spiral structure of it, and how it relates to all these other things in physics and whatnot? Like, is there truth to that, or what? Should I look into that further? Because that's really fascinating.
Well, so I can't speak to the conspiracy theories because I tend to stay away from those.
Yeah, same.
But the double helix structure of DNA, obviously, we've known about that since Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin, don't forget her, discovered it in, I guess, the 1950s. And I think the structure itself works because it's chemically stable. And physically stable. It's a stable structure. Yes, of course, it breaks. There's DNA damage. There's all sorts of things that can interfere with that structure. But as a basis for life, we need that DNA in the nucleus of all our cells. So it's kind of an important structure.
It's wild. Before we move on, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about earlier with inserting an explanation about genetics into the book for the reader. And as you were explaining it, it sounded exactly to me like a scene straight out of the first episode of Breaking Bad. I don't know if you've seen the show, where he's explaining what chemistry is to his class and how
it's the
study of matter, but it's the study of change. And yes, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, can I just be ashamed? I haven't watched Breaking Bad yet.
That's okay.
It's on my list.
You should move it up in your list, to be honest with you, but that's okay. The point is, in that scene, he's talking to his class. He's a chemistry teacher, and he is like, hey, what is chemistry? And their best guess is, it's the study of chemicals. And he's like, no, this supposedly is the study of matter, but I think of it as the study of change. And then he goes into describing changes between molecular structures and bonds and all this kind of stuff that happens. And he's doing like an actual demonstration in front of them where he has a Bunsen burner in front of him and he's spraying it with different chemicals and making the fire turn different colors. And the class is wowed, but he's just at the same time explaining what chemistry is to them. He's also explaining what the show is to the viewers. The show is about change. This character, by the time the show is over, will be a completely different person, and they pull it off. So I highly recommend the show. But anyway, that's what it sounded like, and you're in good company because that's a very well written show.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It's very good. It's very well written. Well, now we've talked about how the science influences your book. How? Let's talk about literary influences behind Gene Fire. What kind of stuff would readers of other things like?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to looking at sort of the comp titles for Gene Fire, there's a series of books. A.G. Riddle, I don't know if you know the name. He wrote a book called Pandemic, which is very scary after being through the COVID
timely.
pandemic.
Yeah.
He's also got a book that the second book in that series is called Genome, and that is a book that's really about messing with the genome and causing worldwide havoc with that. That's a really good one. There's James D. Patterson, the Extinction Files books, are great books. They were a lot of fun reading. I read those recently. That's about, again, messing with DNA, aliens, this time messing with the DNA. But I think in terms of influence in the way I write and the way I wrote this book, I would probably go back to the books that I read a lot when I was a lot younger. So, when I was in my teens, I was reading Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, these sort of books. And, that made a really big impression on me in terms of how books should be written and the characters and, what are the relationships. And I think focusing more on the science necessarily than the character. I know a lot of people say, all good stories are about the characters. And yes, there's characters and they're important. But I kind of like to focus on the science a little bit as well and really delve into that what if question. So with this book, the question is, what if we can write in DNA? What if we could write messages in your DNA? Why would we do that? How would we do that? And that was sort of the question that I wanted to answer. And a lot of those earlier books were also really about those sorts of questions. So, the what if, if you go to Arthur C. Clarke and think about, I don't know, Rama, what if an alien artifact came hurtling into our solar system? What would we do? Or to pick another recent example, what if you got left behind on Mars? How would you deal with that?
Yeah.
So, it's dealing with that question that I wanted to try and do. And that's what I sort of tried to do.
That's awesome. And, some really good titles in that list. Ender's Game, of course, is classic. It's one of them that I really enjoy and go back to a lot. So that sounds cool. I'm definitely going to be checking out Gene Fire because I am one of those people who's like, hey, character above all, like that's what it's all about for me. But when you're talking about hard science fiction, like that genre, like, yes, there should definitely be some hardcore science in there because that's what you're looking for in that genre. That's why you picked up that book, So more power to you, man. Keep it going. What was the biggest lesson that you learned from publishing Gene Fire, your debut novel?
Yeah, so just for those watching, it's self-published, indie publication. The biggest lesson learned, doing a lot of the things myself, I found paying for an editor is very much money well spent. Paying for a cover artist was very much money well spent. I think those two things, if you're going to spend any money on your book, do it on those things. One thing I've learned subsequent to publishing it is that marketing and promoting and all of that is probably the biggest thing you should do. but I didn't. I haven't done it nearly enough publishing. This is why I'm doing interviews like this, to try and help promote the book. And you know this yourself. It's hard work. It's a long slog, publishing
It is.
and promoting a book. But going back to publishing it, I published this through Amazon KDP. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so any of you that's got Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. I can't remember what the price is on. You can buy the EPUB from Amazon, or you can buy the print version as well. Yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned. One of the other lessons I think you need to learn, and this will come at you hard and fast, is scammers. There are so many people out there that are trying to scam indie published authors, whether it's promotion scams or small independent publishers who want to publish your book and rip you off by getting you to pay them vast sums of money. There's a whole host of scams out there that you really need. There needs to be lessons to indie authors out there to show them all the scams that you're going to get exposed to. So yeah, keeping an eye out for all of those sorts of. I like to try and string some of them along sometimes, just to see what their game is, and I string them along up until the point where they tell me how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, that's same here. They do come at you a lot, and that's something that you're right. Most people don't talk about that. Like we really should bring more awareness to it, because I always, especially the reviewers who are asking for money to review your books, I know that they know that authors get like black booked for that stuff. Like if Amazon catches you, you're out. It's as simple as that. And you don't have a leg to stand on because you paid for a review. So for the people asking for that money to do it's baffling to me. It makes me very angry. And so I string them along until they name their price. And then I go, what you're doing is going to hurt all these. And I like preach to them until they block me or whatever. But what are you going to do? But that's a very good lesson to put out there for first time indie authors. Like you said, all this stuff is a lot of hard work, and we're on our own out here, man. We're hiring the editors, we are hiring the cover artists, and yes, those cost money, and no, you should not skimp on those two things. You are absolutely right. And then you are also absolutely right that once the book comes out, your job is not done. It's only begun. Now you have to market the thing, and now you have to, buy ad space, and you have to create trailers and do interviews and do all kinds of stuff. And again, you're on your own. You got to do it yourself.
Yeah, and there's things there's things that I don't do. Like a lot of people talk about getting a newsletter. You've done this yourself. The primer, the free primer that gets people to sign up to your newsletter so that they'll buy your book.
Oh sure.
I've got a job. I don't have time.
Yeah, I have a job too. Same.
But there are some things that I've spent money on. For instance, I'm going to be going to a conference, a sci-fi con called EasterCon over Easter. It's held every year in the UK. So I'm going to that for the first time this Easter to promote this book. And we'll see how that goes. I don't know. I've never been to these sci-fi cons before.
You've never been to any cons before?
No.
Oh, you're going to love it, man.
I've been to a lot of conferences, scientific conferences. I've done that a lot. But the sci-fi cons, no, I've not done that before.
I've been as a goer, to comic conventions. We have a MegaCon in Orlando that over the years, we would go every summer, and over the years, it's grown really big. It's the Comic Con of Florida, basically. It's huge now. And that's, it's just so much fun, man. And there's just so much stuff to see and to do and to buy. And there's just like money everywhere. It's wild. But then most recently, as an author, as a bookseller, I've been behind the table at a couple of these book festivals and book conventions. And it's its own skill to develop. And because of that, I aim to and recommend that other authors do as many of them as possible, because the first couple times, at least for me, I know that I went in hoping to sell a certain number, expecting to sell way, way less. and falling somewhere in between. Like I was
Mhm.
always pleasantly surprised. I sold more than I expected, but far less than I had hoped for. Far less than would have made this thing lucrative, a lucrative
Mm.
decision. So the idea now is to get those numbers up, and so to build your skills, because now you're selling in person.
Mm.
Like I said, it's a whole other skill, and setting up your table and your presentation and everything, that's a whole thing. This last time that I went, I set up my iPad on the table, playing my book trailer on a loop, with a nice little speaker playing the music and everything. And sure enough, man, a couple of people would walk by and would look at it and keep going. But every once in a while, somebody would look at it and stop walking and maybe back up a couple steps and maybe get a little bit closer and maybe a little bit closer. And then they were mine,
Mhm.
like you gotta like rope them in and all that stuff. And I had free stuff to give out, bookmarks and all that stuff. Very like all that's it all comes into it.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'll see how it goes.
Good luck. Good luck.
I'm going with the expectation, or maybe grand hope, to break even. If I
Yeah.
break even, then that's going to be great. But I do know also that if I'm wandering around a convention where a lot of sci-fi books are on sale,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to be coming home with a big stack of them, as many
Yeah.
as I. So I'm not going to be breaking even in general, I don't think. But
Well, the ones that
coming
I've
with
been
some books.
to have not been genre specific. They've been open to all books, but then, all the genres are separated in their, lanes. All the tables are separated into genre lanes. So I would be around all the other sci-fi fantasy books, and we would be across the walkway from all the paranormal books. And so we were just staring at all the ghost books, and they were staring at all the sci-fi books. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's tempting to just go around and spend all the money, but I'm with you, man. Like if I can break even, that's a win for me. The last one I went to, I at least broke even. So,
Fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. All right, so these are lessons that we have learned from publishing. What about the most surprising thing about publishing your novel? I know that for me, it was the week of launch, of launching your debut, that whole like roller coaster of emotions where you've got butterflies and there's excitement and you think this amazing thing is about to happen. And then you hit publish on the book and it's published and it's out. And then you're like, now
Oh.
what? Yeah. Now what? And there's no fanfare, there's no parade, there's no balloons, and you're like, why is nobody excited? And so that was the most surprising thing for me, was the roller coaster of launch week. What about for you?
Yeah, so I had similar experience, I guess. I've seen some great YouTube videos, or little things on Twitter where people go looking for the adoring crowds, and it's like ghost
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, where are you?
Like, oh dear.
Yeah.
I can't remember how many I sold in that first week. Probably we're maybe talking between 20 and 30 copies, I think,
Sounds about
in that
right for me
first
too.
week.
Yeah.
And I had no expectations, no knowledge of. I hadn't done any pre-sale. I hadn't done any promotion before launching it, really. And I think that's one of the things that I learned leading up to the promotion of a new book. You got to do all the work beforehand.
Oh yeah.
All that newsletter work that you do leads up to your launch date, not after it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've been doing all of my Twitter, putting things on Twitter. I made a Facebook author page. I've played around with advertising. I've played around with Amazon advertising. I've played around with Facebook advertising. None of it really works. Not for me. Not really. Get a sale here or there, but it's not worth the money you put in. So far, at least. I don't know. It might change.
Yeah. Yeah, with those it's tricky. There's algorithms to consider and whatnot. There's a whole science behind that you have to learn,
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me was during the launch week, I can't remember what day after it launched, I'd reached up to about, I think, top 15 on Amazon for
Nice.
hard sci-fi and for genetic engineering. These are the two categories. One of them got to 30, one of them went all the way up to 15, and then dropped rapidly after that. But I think I got a screen capture of that, just as a little memory. Flash in the pan and disappears.
Yeah. That's badass. I haven't made any list like that, so that's a nice badge of honor on you. You talk about how you're supposed to do all that stuff leading up to the launch. And I dare say that I'm very impressed with what you've achieved without having done all that stuff ahead of time. Because for me, when I started writing my novel, and I had begun projects before, nothing that I was, ready to publish, or even anything that I finished, to a place where it was publishable. But anyway, I started this novel, and I knew this was the one I was going to publish. This one, like, I'm going to debut as an author with this, so I got to start. And in the 3 years that it took me to write that novel, I was running this YouTube channel. I was running
Mm.
Instagram, I was doing all that stuff, the Facebook, all that stuff. And the goal is build an audience while I'm writing the thing. And once I'm done writing the thing, the audience will have already been there waiting for the thing, and I'll launch it and it'll be awesome. And 3 years in, I've finished the novel. It's about to come out, and I'm looking at my numbers, and I'm like, these are not life-changing numbers that I've got on YouTube, that I've got on Instagram. They're nothing to sneeze at. I worked very hard to get to these numbers, but they're not going to make me quit my job and be a full-time author yet. I'm not there yet. And like you said, launch week comes out. I sold a good, 15, 20 copies. Most of those are friends and family and people who were waiting for it to show their support, and all that is great. Some of those were first time, buys, and that's great too. It's everything since then, with everything that I've been trying on, Instagram ads, Facebook ads, all that stuff. I've tried the same. I don't have any success with Facebook either. I'm with you on that one. I don't see it over there. As far as I can tell, Facebook is for older folks and moms looking for romance novels. If anybody's buying books on that, that's who's buying them, and they're not buying my book. For my audience, sci-fi fantasy, I'm probably going to do a lot better on TikTok. Right now, I'm gearing up to attack TikTok. Like, I've had my account on there for a while. I haven't done anything significant with it yet, but I'm making little videos, that I'm holding on to, and trying to make little trailers and stuff like that. And I'm going to launch a whole campaign into TikTok, because I feel like there's books to be sold there. And then, you know, like I said, the newsletter I've been running. I have a weekly newsletter. That's a whole job in and of itself. Is have something new to write and put out every
Yeah.
single week for people. This is not a job for the faint of heart, or for the weak-willed. I have a full-time job. I have a wife. I have kids. I know that you're busy as well. And yet we dare to take on this monumental task of writing novels and independently publishing them. Like, how?
Yeah, to be honest, it's still a hobby. For me, it's a hobby, and it'll
Yeah.
probably remain a hobby. As I said, I've been writing quite a long time. This novel is 78,000 words or something like that.
That's
I
nice.
have written. I've written I did NaNoWriMo one year. I can't remember which year it was, and I wrote 50,000 words in a month. And those words will never see the light of day.
That's what editing is for, my friend.
I've written novella. I think there's a 22,000 word novella, which I'd still like to get published. Maybe I might put that out there someday, if I can ever find time to do the editing. But yeah, I think working your way up to this sort of length,
Sure.
I don't think you necessarily leap in and write a novel for the first time, having never written any other words.
No, yeah, definitely not.
And then the promoting. So, you're talking about TikTok. I do have a TikTok account. I don't think I've ever used it. And I'm starting to get less and less enthusiastic about it, just in case the US completely stops it.
That whole thing.
And stops it. They may do that.
They may indeed. They don't sound like very reasonable people right now, so they may indeed, but we'll see. We'll see how that all pans out. A lot of angles to it, man. Just like all this other stuff, a lot of angles to consider. All right. Well, we're winding down here. Let's see here. Any writing contest advice? You mentioned earlier, you like to enter these contests because by the end of it, you have something that you can go ahead and publish somewhere else, even if you didn't win the contest. That in and of itself is great writing advice. But if you have anything else, writing contest related.
So I can talk about the writing contests that I've been involved in. One of them is, as I mentioned, the NYCM, the New York City Midnight contests. They're great. There's a newer one called Writing Battle, which has started a couple of years ago. That's also a lot of fun. And one that's just, I'm not going to name what we normally call it, twists in the tail, has just been launched, and they held their first inaugural contest literally a couple of weeks ago. I think my advice for these is, if you're interested in writing short stories, these are a great way to learn, because the communities in these contests are fantastic. Really generous with time, feedback, and support. There's a lot of people out there to champion your work because they love it. And you do the same for their work, because some of these authors are fantastic, especially the ones, yes, of course, the ones that go on to win it are inevitably really great stories. But beyond that, there's so many stories that people write that it's the support, I think. So my advice is, get in on these contests. Yes, you've got to pay a little bit of money, but many of them are relatively cheap. You're talking 15 to 20 pounds, $20, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And you get the community, you get the spirit, you get the story at the end of it that you've been forced to write with prompts and things like that. And you've also got a chance of winning it. And, when you win these things, you're up for thousands of pounds or thousands of dollars, if you can get to the end. And, I think they are a lot of fun. And it gets me writing. It really, gets the juices flowing. If I get thrown a weird prompt, political satire with an ice cream, that was one of the prompts that I had for a contest a few years ago. And I wrote probably one of the best things I think I've written for that prompt, even though it's not my genre, it's not what I'm interested. But I wrote something that I was really proud of, and I'm still trying to get that published somewhere. It's very topical, shall we say.
That's beautiful,
So, yeah,
man. You
I
step
think that-
outside your comfort zone a little bit, and you'll wound up finding a gem. That's nice.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about these contests, is they do push you out of your comfort zone, and you learn all of a sudden, maybe you can write romance, maybe you can write a rom-com, because you did it. And even though that's not the genre you want to be known for, maybe you want to inject a little bit of romance into your sci-fi, or a little bit of thriller into your historical fiction. So I think learning to write these other genres, being pushed to do it, can help you with writing whatever genre you're interested in writing. So I think those sort of things are the big advantage of these contests. The disadvantage of these contests is they're horribly addictive. Once you get in and start doing them, you can't stop. It's really addictive.
All right. Fair warning. All right. How about some book recommendations to go out on here?
We'll go out on here. One that I recommend mostly over the last couple of years is The Three-Body Problem, Cixin Liu. And the sequel to that, which is The Dark Forest. So The Three-Body Problem is going to be a TV show soon. I think it's coming out imminently.
The title sounds familiar, so that's probably true. I usually have my ear to the grindstone with TV shows, so that sounds right.
So Three-Body Problem is a fantastic book, but The Dark Forest and Death's End is the third book in that series. But The Dark Forest, just the concept of the Dark Forest is just phenomenal. Really, really good. Some books I've been reading lately. Where is it? I've got it here somewhere. Here it is. That's Becky Chambers. Her Wayfarer series. I've just whipped through those. I got the 4 books for Christmas, and I'm on the 4th book already. I've really enjoyed those ones. Some of them slightly better than others. Some of them are very challenging with lots of points of view and things like that. But the characters are just fantastic in those books. So definitely recommend those. But I kind of like to also recommend, I started off earlier talking about the classics, Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov and Heinlein and all of those guys. Don't forget that those guys wrote hundreds of books between them, and many of them are fantastic. Some of them are challenging. Reading 2001: Space Odyssey, maybe watch the movie, read the book, but really challenging concepts and really interesting concepts. And Heinlein's got Stranger in a Strange Land, and I think The Moon is a Heart's Mistress, and lots of these classics. You should read them. I've got a series actually. I don't know if you know this one, SF Masterworks.
Pull it back a little bit. Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I haven't seen that before.
Master-
What's that
I
about?
don't know if they've got these in the US, but they've definitely got them here in the UK. That's a series that you can get, and if you can look it up on Wikipedia and have a look at that series. There's about 100 books in that series, and I've probably bought more than half of them, and every single one of them is fantastic. You're talking, Larry Niven's Ringworld, Flowers for Algernon, Daniel Keyes, the whole bunch of things that are just great. There's so much good sci-fi out there, and it's maybe go back further, go back to H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and all the Victorian sci-fi writers. Some great things there too.
I really should. I would love to go back and read some of those classics like that, because you got to figure that so much of what they did became DNA for what sci-fi is now, and it would be pretty cool to see how far we've come in the genre, so to speak.
Yeah.
Mr. Flanagan, this next question is something new that I started doing because these are the last couple of interview episodes, and I'm going to start making things about me. So please be sure to accept the fact that no is a acceptable answer to this question. But do you have any questions for me?
How do you find writing your newsletter? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. What sort of things do you write about in your newsletter?
Well, I'm only now becoming more and more comfortable writing my newsletters. When I first started, see, I have this thing where I hate writing about myself. I don't keep a journal. Every time that I've tried keeping a journal, I've lasted 2, maybe 3 entries, and then I just never pick it up again. It's not my thing. This novel that I've written exists because I had a crazy mushroom trip once, and I wanted to tell people about it, but I hate writing about myself, so I gave it to an imaginary character, and then before I knew it, I had a novel in front of me. So because of that, my newsletter used to just be updates on whatever I'm writing right now and updates on what's going on the channel. But now that the book is out, and now that I've been doing the newsletter for a lot longer, I'm getting a little more comfortable writing a little bit more about myself. I like to share, since it's weekly, I usually just cover anything significant that happened that week, whether it's something that I did at work, something that I enjoyed watching or reading, or some restaurant that I discovered, something like that. If I've had some sort of epiphany with the book that I'm writing, I go into that. I'm currently like in a 0 draft kind of phase with this next book. So I'm throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and it's opening up a lot of possibilities. So I like talking about that. Just try to mix it up. I try to keep it light and funny whenever possible. I try to keep it relevant to my genre if possible. And at the end of the day, people who are following you because they like your books, you are the brand. Essentially, they're following you. Whatever the next book is, they're going to pick it up because they're following you. So the way to keep them engaged is, talk about yourself a little bit, share about yourself, make a connection with them, and open the lines of communication to them too. That's the other part for me. Once I started encouraging them to respond to my mailing list with emails to myself, and every newsletter I send out, I get at least 5 emails from different people who had something to say about what I wrote in that newsletter. Whether it's words of encouragement because I was feeling down on that particular newsletter, or it's, I've shared that experience, or maybe they have questions about the book, whatever it is. That's a big one, is open the lines of communication through that newsletter. And that's how I run it.
Can I also ask what you're writing next?
Sure, yeah. So my series MYTHIC, I'll throw the cover back up so you can see here, is it's a big sci-fi fantasy series, and each novel is going to follow a different kind kind of plot. So this first one is a very crime thriller, detective chasing a killer kind of stuff. But throughout the course of this first novel, they unravel a lot of mysteries about the world that they live in, and that leads into book two, which is way more of a sci-fi fantasy, like adventure, classic adventure. Like there's going to be quests and MacGuffins and stuff like that. And then in book three, it's going to be more of like a space war battleships blowing up and all kinds of fun stuff like that. It's going to continue like expanding and evolving as the series goes on. So what I'm writing right now is the big like sci-fi fantasy adventure. I'm exploring the world that I've created. I'm going to different ancient locations and unraveling more mysteries and introducing new races and explaining the magic system a little bit more because it's very mysterious in the first book. Stuff like that.
Sounds
Yeah.
cool.
Thanks.
Do you think there's pros and cons to writing a series versus standalone?
There absolutely is, and I probably should have started writing standalones first rather than diving directly into a series. Many people tell you don't start by diving into a series. I like to do the exact opposite of what people tell me. So I started with a series because they said no to that. I have an ensemble cast because they told me don't do that. And I mix a bunch of genres together because they told me don't do that. So I broke all the rules on the first one here. And I got to say, I learned a lot from it, but I feel like the next one's going to be even better. I'm very proud of this one, to be honest with you. It's turned out really, really good. All right. We're going to talk more about all of this stuff in the green room. For anybody wanting more from James Flanagan, join us tomorrow in the green room. It should be up by 4 p.m. unless I have any unforeseen technical difficulties. Hopefully not, but it should be up by 4 p.m. And James, I'll provide you with a link. No worries. Thank you very much for joining me. Did you want to plug or let anybody else know anything before we go?
You can find the book. Ooh, there it is.
Oh, sorry.
It's on Amazon. So if you just search Gene Fire on Amazon, wherever you are, I think wherever Amazon is, you'll find it.
And there's a link down below.
Yeah.
So you can find it there.
Fantastic.
Next week is an off week for the interview show. We don't have a guest lined up. Our next guest is 2 weeks from now, I believe. So next week it's just going to be me, and we're going to be doing writing sprints and hanging out, assuming that I figure out this whole camera thing. We'll see about that. To everybody who joined us, thank you very much. Newsletter link down below for your free download. Go pick up a copy of Gene Fire. The cover is fire as well, if I may add. Excellent cover. Thank you all for joining us. And Right on Writers, we are out.